Welcome, boys and girls. Costin here with a discussion about Game of Thrones War for Westeros. I was able to play an early preview demo given to me by the developers, and I did screw up with regards to embargo. My apologies on that subject. But regardless, we were able to play 1v1 skirmish and multiplayer. So skirmish against AI, easy, normal, and hard AI as either House Stark or House Lannister. I think the unit rosters were fairly complete, though there were certainly some surprises, I admit, because all the footage we had seen, the trailers, the information we had of the game before this demo and recently was that, oh, we had Jon Snow, we had Jaime, right? Daenerys, of course, and the Night King, but then we get this demo and we have Robb Stark and we have Grey Wind, his direwolf, and we also have Ghost as a hero for the Stark. So you had 4 heroes for the Starks. The Lannister had 2, which were Jaime and Tywin. That does offer certain possibilities in terms of what they can do with regards to a campaign, or maybe it's just cool to have Tywin and Robb in the game. That does make sense, but there's a lot of different opportunities since they've decided to go have those kind of heroes. And yeah, Arya and Gregor Clegane as well in the game, and not the undead Gregor Clegane, the alive version of Gregor Clegane. Though it's kind of weird, you have Gregor Clegane before he died, basically, or was poisoned by Oberyn. And then you have Arya after she's become a faceless man, or woman, really. But yeah, just kind of an interesting situation right there. In terms of the technical aspect of the game, I would say it ran fairly well. The only issues I encountered, there's bugs, it's an early build version and all that. So pathfinding issues for abilities, sometimes they would not work properly. But for the most part, ran fairly well. Didn't notice any performance drops or anything like that. I would have liked a scaling option for the text in the game because it was hard for me to read it. I do have poor eyesight, so it would have been something very beneficial to have. But I guess options menu, those kind of things will be resolved. I definitely imagine they'll fix the pathfinding issue, and hopefully they will fix the text size situation in the game. We had the way the game works. A lot of people have looked at the gameplay footage and remarked, "Oh, this is like Battle for Middle-earth 2." And when you play it, it does certainly remind you of that. And that's a comparison quite a few people have made. One, because the workers have a cart that they have with them, and that's something the workers in Battle for Middle-earth 2 had, and secondly, because of the way the resource system works differently, but does remind you of Battle for Middle-earth. I was also reminded of Ancestors Legacy, especially because of the way units work. So you had squads of units, and you could heal them up. You had a healing system for them, which was not quite like Battle for Middle-earth 2. But resource-wise, the way the maps work is you have areas that you control. So you have your starting location, which is tied to your keep, and that has some resource production, but the main resource production is on the map. And those areas are controlled by outposts. But with resources, in Battle for Middle-earth 2, you only had so many resource buildings you could construct because it was based on proximity. If you had too many of them close together, or if you had any of them close together, then the resource payoff would drop. So you wanted to split your resource buildings all across the map to really generate a lot of money there. Here, it wasn't based on proximity, but it was based on zone of control. So your initial zone of control would allow you to have 2 influence buildings. So you had gold and influence as resources. So you could have 2 influence buildings. Influence could only be gained from certain locations where you can construct either a werewood shrine or a golden lion. But then you could, in terms of gold, you could have 6 windmills or mine shafts. Windmills for the Starks, mine shafts for the Lannisters. You could build these wherever you wanted, but you also had high yield zones where you could construct windmills or mine shafts, gold production, and thus you were encouraged to basically fight for map control quite heavily. The way the game mode that we had access to worked is that you could either win by destroying the enemy keep, or you could win by controlling all outposts on the map, basically control the map, and that would give you, that would start the timer, that would lead to victory or defeat. That's how it would function. You could also only construct outside of your initial area of control by taking control of an outpost. And you didn't have high yield zones for gold in your initial zone. Those came in the middle of the map, basically. 2 maps, Greywater Watch and Ashmark. Greywater had 3 zones of control, 3 outposts. Ashmark had 2. You also had creeps, and the way the creeps worked is they were represented by the Brotherhood of Outlaws, the Brotherhood of Banners, basically Cell Swords, Stone Crows, or Dreadfort Spears. So those were the units represented there in terms of creeps. Does indicate to me that we might have Jon Snow going against the Boltons. Right there, certainly we've seen the Boltons in one of the very early screenshots, or at least on the campaign map side of things, we saw the Bolton banner. So does beg the question of how things are going to work out. Like, different possibilities. They could definitely, with Tywin, Robb, with those Bolton units, with the Brotherhood units, there's a lot of different scenarios they could go for in terms of campaign missions if they decide to take those opportunities. That does remain to be seen. Unit rosters, so hero rosters, Jon Snow, Robb Stark, Grey Wind, Ghost on the Stark side, Jaime and Tywin on the Lannister side. So yes, the Starks did have a significant hero advantage. But with Tywin and Robb, again, opportunities. Could have maybe the War of 5 Kings. And while the 4 factions that will be in the final version of the game will be Targaryen, Stark, Lannister, and White Walkers, it does present opportunities. Like, you could definitely have campaign scenarios where you're not designing a faction that's going to be playable, but you can definitely have units that for campaign scenarios that you're fighting against, foes that you're dealing with in a campaign. Unit roster-wise, the Starks had Stark units, so swordsmen, spearmen, archers, lancers, and wolves, Stark wolves. Wolves, because not direwolves, but wolves, beyond the direwolf heroes. And then you had the Night's Watch and Free Folk. You could get one of them at tier 2. You could either get Night's Watch or Free Folk at tier 2. At tier 3, you would gain both of them. And upgrades that would benefit others. So, for instance, Night's Watch could, there was an upgrade they would give the Free Folk, improving their units. Or you could get an upgrade from the Free Folk that would improve the Night's Watch catapults, because you did have catapults from the Night's Watch. You had catapults, crossbowmen, infantry, heavy infantry. So yeah, the Starks did have some pretty powerful units available, like having mammoths and giants available in their roster. And yeah, that can be ridiculous. I gotta say, running around a bunch of giants tearing down the Lannisters was hilarious. I only found matches as either Stark or Lannister against each other. I didn't play a mirror match. Maybe I should have. I guess it could have been ridiculous. The Lannisters, on the flip side, they had two swordsman unit, one heavy version, basically a higher tier version. And the way these heavier units work, by the way, the higher tier units worked, yeah, they were technically more powerful, but you could also get upgrades for tier 1 units that would buff them up quite a bit and easier to get. Like, there was an upgrade that would improve squad size, so you could have more entities in a unit that would boost their combat ability by quite a bit. So quite a few strategies that were available. You could also build towers and walls, so a defensive playstyle may be workable. I think it probably will be far more relevant in like team games, like big team games, depend on how far they're willing to go with regards to that. Regardless, the Lannisters did have their swordsmen, their spearmen, their archers, crossbowmen, knights, and then mercenaries. So Stone Crows, you could pick a mercenary type. You'd get a building where you would get a ticket for mercenaries. Like these would build over time to like free, and you could get to like up to mercenary units at the time. Like you have more actually. Like it's just like you could only spawn free at the time, and you'd either have Stone Crows, the Golden Company, sellswords, or Knights of Summer, which were an alternative cavalry unit that had lances. So you had Stark Lancers. The Lannister Knights didn't have lances, but you could get lances as the Lannisters. They had swords, the Lannister Knights, that is. Cavalry did trample damage, something similar again with Battle for Middle-earth. There's reasons why people have made the comparison to Battle for Middle-earth, and let's just say it holds up. Still reminded of Ancestor's Legacy, especially because you could heal up squads of soldiers, you know, replenish individual entities. Like, yeah, you could do that in Battle for Middle-earth, but it was based on healing structures. And it wasn't based on resources. Here was based on resources. That's why I make the comparison to Ancestor's Legacy. But the Lannisters also had trebuchets. They had ballistas. Yes, they're rather infamous ballistas. Shame Bronn wasn't a hero. Maybe Tyrion should also be a hero, but definitely Bronn, hero Bronn, taking down a freaking dragon with the ballistae. And then they ruined the whole point of those ballistae, is how exceptional it was for Bronn to do that in the next season. But regardless, Trebuchet's Wildfire. Oh yeah, they had Wildfire. The Lannisters had Wildfire artillery. So you could get Pyromancers, and then you can get that upgrade that gave your artillery Wildfire. It could also blow up in your face. It kind of felt a bit like Skaven. Lannisters also had an advantage in the sense that they could trade between gold and influence. Like you could take your influence. It was not the most favorable trade, but you could trade between influence and gold, so having economic flexibility in a Lannister battle situation. You did have the Kingsguard. It was just an elite unit, really powerful unit, undeniably so. But yeah, definitely could smash through most opponents. You would also farm creeps, mercenaries, Stone Crows, Brotherhood, Dreadfort, all that for experience and money. There was one camp on Ashmark in the middle of the map. There were 2 creep camps on Greywater Watch. Graphically, looked really good. In terms of how, you know, how everything felt, like it definitely felt like Game of Thrones. I'm going to say that much. Like it was definitely appropriate, like gritty, really solid design there by the artists. There, really good handling on that subject. I'm really curious with the dragon, right, or the dragons, because I imagine the White Walkers will have their frost dragon, right? You know, they're gonna have, what is it, Viserion? They're going to have Viserion as a dragon. Begs the question of campaigns again. Like, how are the campaigns going to be handled? Because I certainly hope it's not just going to be like a campaign map, right? Where you just have these factions and they fight each other. I hope there's going to be an actual story progression, and it could start with the War of Five Kings and then develop from there with the Starks and the Lannisters, Targaryens, and White Walkers. And of course, not all of them have to start at the same point. Like the White Walkers should start later. Daenerys' campaign could just start as she comes into Westeros, and maybe you can make much better decisions than she did in the lore. Begs the question of what she's going to have in terms of unit roster. Because, yeah, Dothraki and Unsullied, but what about foot infantry? Like, I guess mercenaries, right? Because she did have them. Maybe in this game universe, she doesn't leave Daria behind in Essos for no damn good reason. But yeah, let's not go into the discussion about the show and the many, many issues with regards to the show's storyline as opposed to the books, or just common freaking sense. Yeah, I have a lot of bones to pick on that subject. But that's, I guess, why this is compelling to me. It's like they could provide a fairly interesting storyline. They could have these alternate scenarios where things do work out differently, where you do make better decisions or even worse decisions compared to what have happened in quote-unquote canon. And I say quote unquote because I don't take the last season, especially Game of Thrones, seriously. The one before that, kind of, there were some good moments, but still, maybe as Daenerys, it's like, while Jon Snow is trying to hold back the White Walkers, you were just conquering the rest of Westeros, and then you get to decide, it's like, well, what do I do about Jon Snow as Daenerys? Also, just giants not being completely wiped out to a man, that would definitely be an interesting change. And I don't remember in the books, like, were they wiped out to the last one? Certainly the Battle of Winterfell didn't happen, and in the books it's not Jon Snow who is leading an army against Winterfell, it's Stannis. And he's actually, and yes, he did that in the show as well, but that was a joke. Very different in the books compared to the show, suffice to say, on that subject. But it's unresolved. That's kind of the weird thing about Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, is like, you have a storyline in the show that a lot of us would prefer didn't exist, and then you have the storyline in the books, and the last 2 books haven't come out. So definitely opportunities on that if they don't screw up. They probably will have some kind of global conquest mode, but this brings up the question of how they're gonna what their focus of this game is going to be. Because I'm gonna say it outright, if it's gonna be PvP, I don't really think it's gonna do very well. And I say this in general about strategy games. Like, yes, I know every strategy game developer wants the next big PvP hit, and a lot of strategy games, RTS games in particular, do seem to make the mistake of focusing on PvP. And let me say this much. As someone who's played a lot of freaking StarCraft, a lot of freaking Warcraft, a lot of Battle for Middle-earth in multiplayer, because yes, I did play Battle for Middle-earth 1, especially in multiplayer, as did many other people, though I think 2 is far more popular in that respect. Those games were not popular in multiplayer because there was a multiplayer focus for those games. That came later. The initial focus for StarCraft 1, for Warcraft 3, for Battle for Middle-earth, actually, almost the exclusive focus, because we all know how well EA handled the multiplayer side of things with Battle for Middle-earth 1 and 2. But the focus of those games, the reason those games became the hits that they are, is that they had a great campaign experience. You do that, and the multiplayer scene will follow. You can fix balance issues and problems, but you gotta deliver a solid campaign experience first and foremost. This is what ruined Stormgate and Zeroscape most recently. Sure, that was a StarCraft 2 comparison, and yes, StarCraft 2 did launch with a lot of things, but let me point out that StarCraft 2 did not launch with a co-op mode, did not launch with the insane things that it currently has. That took time. It took time for arcade to be built up, for people to make custom maps and all that, for the multiplayer scene to be developed. And if you're trying to create an RTS experience that's going to draw in a huge player base, you can't go in to it with this idea that, oh, we're just going to have a multiplayer scene that's going to be really strong from the beginning. No, you're going to have to build that up over a period of time. And the way you build that up, the way you hook people in initially, is with a good storyline, is with a good campaign gameplay experience in a campaign. I think that's where a lot of RTS games do fail, really. And that's what worked for StarCraft, what worked for Warcraft, what did deliver for Battle for Middle-earth. Like, it's telling in a lot of ways that the one expansion we did get for Battle for Middle-earth 2 was about the Rise of the Witch King. Like, if Electronic Arts can freaking figure this shit out, I think a lot more developers can as well. So that is the question for me. Like, I did like what I played from a skirmish perspective, but I want more, and I definitely want a campaign experience that's really worth it. Like, good mission design, good gameplay, longevity, and yeah, maybe a conquest mode, but even the conquest mode or a global war should be like, something you do after you finish the campaign, and then you get to decide, okay, let's just play this 4-player or 4-faction mode, because Battle for Middle-earth had that, the 2 had that mode. And so did Command and Conquer Free. And I know a lot of people have a lot of different perspectives on Command and Conquer Free, but I think virtually all of us would agree that the main selling point of Kane's Wrath and Tiberium Wars was the campaign. The Conquest mode, Global Conquest, which then EA used for Battle for Middle-earth 2's mode as well, that was secondary to the campaign mode. So yeah, that to me is the most important. The campaign is most important, not the multiplayer, not the skirmish. That's where I stand. The game looks great, does run great. The battles are fun. The gameplay is fun. Balancing, I felt it was pretty solid, really. Like, you might say, oh, one side has 4 heroes and giants. Well, yeah, you can counter that. It might not be the easiest thing in the world, and I'm sure in multiplayer matches, people are going to figure out ways to do so. But that's kind of the reason you develop a multiplayer community over time, because you launch a game, it's going to have balance problems, and you're not going to realize that until a lot of people are playing it, and it just comes out naturally what works, what doesn't. It takes time, and once that's happened, that's when you can really focus on the balancing, the fine-tuning, different modes, etc. for multiplayer. That's all I had to say. Really looking forward to this one. I'll see you on the next one.